everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host, and this week in Reykjavik, it's springtime. I'm gonna try and start skipping the Reykjavik weather report that I traditionally give for some reason at the start of these podcasts, and actually get onto the games a little faster. Before I lived here, I used to wonder why people in Reykjavik and Iceland talk about the temperature and the weather so much. Now that I live here, I kind of get it. It defines everything that you do. So, but I'm going to try and cut down on it anyway. So this week I played a few games. I played 4 games total. The one that I played the most is Ghostwire Tokyo. This is an open world light horror game set in Shibuya in Tokyo, a haunted Shibuya where everyone has mysteriously vanished. It's by Tango Gameworks and published by Bethesda. I finished it in about 22 hours, and so that's the main game that I have been playing this week, and it will be the featured game of this episode. So hang out for a full review of that one. I have continued to play Kirby and the Forgotten Land, which is just still proving to be an absolute delight. It's very light. It's very playful. It's very fun, colourful. It's basic. It's easy, and it is just full of fun. It's the most fun video game. So I'm really enjoying that one, but it's not one of the main games I've been playing. I've been doing a level or 2 before bed and really enjoying it. It's a really good Nintendo game. If people are missing those first-party Nintendo games of the Mario Odyssey variety, this is a light version, but it still has that spirit. Really enjoying it. I've also been playing a little bit of Weird West. Not really enough to talk about it yet in any detail. The jury is out on Weird West for me. Some of the people in the podcast's community are playing it and enjoying it. I'm seeing some mixed critical responses out there on the internet. Overall, people seem to be really liking this game. For me, there is still some gameplay that I need to get through to form a full opinion. So I'm going to keep playing Weird West. And I've actually finished a couple of games this week that is going to make the time for me to focus more on Weird West, Kirby, and some other games that I've got on the slate. I finished, first of all, a Memoir Blue. This is a game that came out this year, published by Annapurna, by a first-time developer, and so should perhaps be treated with a little bit of kindness, as it is a first-time, apparently solo developer. It's a series of wordless vignettes and mini-games in which you come through a slightly emotional or ostensibly emotional story about a mother and daughter, an adult daughter who is a swimmer, perhaps like an Olympian or something like that, or at least a swimming enthusiast, and her mother and the relationship that they had. This is a game that is under an hour long, and I think if it weren't for the fact that it was an Annapurna game, I may have skipped this one, because the visuals didn't really grab me. The overall aesthetic presentation didn't grab me, and I think a game of this type, with minimal gameplay, really does trade on that, on the story and on the presentation. And I was hugely disappointed by this game. I felt that the mini-games were quite odd and boring, really. They were minimally interactive, for example, clicking a button several times or picking up 3 objects and hanging them to make a door open, or pressing a lift button to make an elevator door open. That was literally a section of gameplay. Just hit the lift button, cutscene before, cutscene after. The gameplay is really minimal to the degree at which it might as well not be there. So that the planning of this game is a mystery to me, really. I'm not sure why this gameplay seemed like it would be a good idea. And the game also uses a mouse-over cursor control scheme, which is very strange for a game that is a Game Pass Day 1 game that's also coming out on consoles, on PS5 and Switch, because you know that console players are going to be using controllers, and it's designed for a mouse, seemingly. So that there's just a lot wrong with this game, and it's a bit of a mystery to me generally. It also comes at a time when the publisher Annapurna Interactive, one of my favourites, I'm very much on the record as enjoying their output, is going through a bit of a creative lull. They've put out several games that I really didn't like over the last couple of years, and they were kind of an all-killer, no-filler indie publisher. They're also going through some other kinds of problems. If you're interested, you can look at People Make Games, YouTube documentarians who make documentaries about workplace conditions for workers. They recently had some reporting about some studios that have not been well run under the purview of Annapurna Interactive. So let's hope that they can figure out what's going wrong over there and get back to where we want them to be. I think everyone who plays video games wants the people who make them to be valued, to be paid well, to be treated well in the workplace, and for artistic expression to be able to thrive in the game-making environment alongside other concerns, alongside commercial concerns and industry trends and that kind of thing. We want healthy and happy game devs doing their best work, So it's a bit of a bummer to hear otherwise. But anyway, that was a Memoir Blue. And before I get on to Ghostwire Tokyo, let me just give a little shout out to my patrons. We've got a really good patron Discord for people that support the show on Patreon, where we all talk all the time about what we're playing. We share screenshots, we share recommendations, and we just talk about games. There is currently an endless chat going on about Elden Ring as everyone continues to play it with varying degrees of progress and success. We've got a thread going about Weird West at the moment because a lot of people have hopped straight onto that after it came out on Game Pass. And we have the Top 5s channel where we talk about our top 5 favourite whatever. It's always something different, always something interesting, always something new. The current thread is about our top 5 video game sunsets. This theme was posted by Joe at New Dawn Games, so thanks very much to Joe for the theme. And I had a lot of fun going back through my phone photo library, and it turns out that a very large proportion of my game screenshots are of sunsets. And so everyone's posting their favourite video game sunsets in there at the minute, all the way from things like Red Dead 2 and Breath of the Wild to Horizon Zero Dawn and Spiritfarer, pixelated and illustrated sunsets. It's really interesting, but if you would like to come and join us on our Discord, then you can support the show at Patreon, at patreon.com/gaminginthewild for $1 a month or more if you like. There's occasional extra episodes, things like that. And so thank you very much to all my existing patrons. I really do enjoy that Discord every day. And thank you very much to you if that's something that you're interested in. It's patreon.com/gaminginthewild to support the show. I'll put a link in the description if that is something that interests you. And with all of that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of this episode, Ghostwire Tokyo. So Ghostwire Tokyo is a 2022 game. It came out just a couple of weeks ago on PlayStation 5 and PC, I believe. It's by Tango Gameworks, the makers of Evil Within, not a series that I have played, but a highly rated horror series, apparently much more hardcore than this one. It's directed by Kenji Kimura and published by Bethesda Softworks. And this is an interesting game. It's a stylized horror game, but it's not really horrible. It's more spooky. And I first became aware of this one at a PlayStation State of Play a while ago, and it was kind of folded in with a lot of new game announcements, such as Forspoken was in there, and a whole bunch of other PlayStation exclusives and PlayStation-focused games that were coming out on PS5 across the coming years. And I had a vague interest in it. There's some interesting things about it. First and foremost, that it seems to really employ a lot of Japanese culture in it, and you can see that in the visuals. You can see that in the setting. It is subtitled in the Japanese language. It is set in Shibuya. The protagonist is Japanese, and all the characters are Japanese. And so for fans of Japanese games and really, really heavily Japan-focused games, it was interesting from the off. I'm not a natural horror game player, But there was enough in the trailers for this game to get my attention, to make me interested. It looks quite unusual in its presentation. The villains wear white masks and have black bodysuits. You can see all of the neon lights of Tokyo. It looked mysterious and spooky without being horrifying, and combined with the fact that it was Bethesda published, and I'm interested in whatever Bethesda are doing after enjoying Skyrim and Fallout and all that kind of stuff. It was enough of a package for me to be interested in playing it. I should also mention that I got a code for this one, and so thank you to Bethesda for the review code. The game is priced at 65 quid, which means I probably wouldn't have played it if I weren't getting a code for it. But I am glad that I got that code, and I'm glad that I got to play this game. It has some interesting stuff going on. It's more than meets the eye, and maybe more than the sum of its parts, in quite an interesting and surprising way. And I'm really glad that I played through to the end of it. I was about to podcast about this game earlier today, but I was on the penultimate chapter of it, and I was thinking maybe I will just do a sort of state of play where I'm up to, my general thoughts about it. But I did play through to the end, and the ending did actually change my view of it a little bit. Like, it took on some interesting tones that I was really glad that I had experienced before I talked about the game. It did change my overall outlook on the game quite a bit. And this is going to be a largely spoiler-free review, as always. I am going to talk about some things like enemy types and gameplay that is revealed throughout the game, but not about story in any great degree, and not about bosses or anything like that. But I will be talking about some gameplay that unfolds as the game progresses. So if that bothers you, I just wanted to give you a heads up. But other than that, you'll be safe. The game is currently sitting at a 75 on Metacritic for PS5 and a 79 on PC, with a 79 from players, although I did notice that some of the player reviews are just silly. So I'm starting to think I should just disregard player scores on Metacritic. There's just so much bombing and trolling going on there. It's not really worth mentioning. This might be the last time that I do. But in this case, whatever player wars have been going on have matched the critic score of 75 to 79. So it's a 7.5 or an 8 out of 10 is the consensus. There are some 10s, there are some 6s. It's a little bit spread out across that range. How Long to Beat has the game at 11 hours for the story, 18 for main and extras, 35 hours for completionists. My playthrough was 22 hours, and I think I'm at 35% trophies. I did some open world stuff, mostly to make sure that I was leveling up, but I didn't do all of the side missions by any stretch. I just did a few here and there. And the developers describe it as: Tokyo's population has vanished, and a deadly supernatural forces prowl the streets, use an arsenal of elemental abilities to unravel the truth behind the disappearance and save Tokyo. And my description of it is a spooky open-world action game set in haunted Shibuya that juggles Japanese mythology with social commentary, moments of silliness, memorable set pieces, and some surprisingly emotional notes. So what is Ghostwire Tokyo? It's a first-person open-world game. It looks like it's going to be more of a horror than it is, but it's really just occasionally spooky and unnerving. There weren't many jump scares for people who care about things like that, just a couple. But there were moments that were unnerving, that did stick with me after I stopped playing. I think that this is really at the shallow end of the pool when it comes to horror games, and unless you are very, very sensitive, you could probably get away with playing this one. I am quite sensitive to horrible horror content, but I was able to get through this one quite well. For reference, I was also able to get through Resident Evil Village because it was more silly and over the top than it was scary. This one has a little bit of psychological horror and some unnerving scenarios, but there is no gore at all. It's not particularly violent. It's not particularly scary, really. A couple of gross bosses, but that's kind of it. It's set in Shibuya, and the game begins moments after a supernatural event has befallen Tokyo. A fog rolls across the city in the intro sequence, and everyone vanishes as it sweeps over Shibuya and Tokyo. People vanish, their clothes drop to the floor, and so there are piles of clothes, there are crashed cars, there are empty shops with music still playing through the open doorways. Everyone has just vanished. And so it has this vanishing quality, like a Tokyo after a vanishing. But your character, Akito, a young guy, is saved from this strange rapture when a spirit called KK jumps into his body at the decisive moment. And somehow they survive and fuse together, a little bit like Johnny Silverhand in Cyberpunk. So you end up with another personality in your mind who is going to be your co-pilot and your guide through this game. So you have a disembodied voice, KK, who will talk to you. The relationship between Akito and KK starts off a little fraught, as you might expect, with KK very determined to get to the bottom of what's going on, and Akito very freaked out by what is happening, and a little bit of a power struggle occurs in the early part of the game. So it has that co-pilot possession thing going on that you sometimes see in games. It's a good way to give you a narrator or a counterpart or a character that is with you in a single-player game. And it works really well here. KK talks to you throughout the game, and the relationship between he and Akito evolves in a really cool way throughout the game. So they've done a really good job with that. And you start off on the Shibuya Scramble Crossing, maybe the most famous site in all of Tokyo. And the fog surrounds the whole area. The fog is like a silver mist that hangs around the edges of the play area, and if you walk into it, you start to quickly lose health. So the fog is like an artificial boundary around the play area, and it covers the whole of Tokyo at the beginning of the game, so you can only really walk down one street. But you do get to clear this fog by purifying sacred sites throughout the city, these shrines. They are shrines that you might be familiar with, like a tall red wooden gate with a hooked carapace on the top of it. They are really cool and really striking and really present in Japanese iconography. And so as you purify these shrines, it will open up more of the city until you get like a fairly large chunk, I would say, 10 or 20 city blocks to explore. So it's not a vast game in the open world scale of things, but it's enough of an interesting area. It's about right for this game. It suits the game well. And the gameplay has a couple of elements to it. There is the traversal, and it's really slick, actually. It's really well done. It's very fluid. It's very generous. It feels very natural. You run at quite a clip. Your walk is nice and fast. You have a decent high jump. You can mantle, and you can grab onto things. So if you see a wire fence, you can probably just jump onto it and very easily be on the other side. You can jump up and catch onto balconies. You can scale buildings. So it's a game that has a lot of verticality to it as well. It doesn't all happen at ground level, and that being a big aspect of Tokyo and central Tokyo, it does mean that you can get up to pretty high places and look down across the city by going up stairways, by using lifts, by going up the inside and outside of buildings, using your climbing abilities and so forth, and some really nice environmental design. You can also glide, which means you can jump and then float downwards a little way. It starts off being quite a short distance, but you can power it up. You can also grapple. There are these creatures called Tengu, and if you see one above you, if you are within range, you can grapple onto it. And it's a little bit like that Ratchet and Clank thing, where you hook shot onto something and suddenly you're just on top of the building really, really quickly. So it's using the PS5's SSD to allow for some really, really quick traversal. There is also no fall damage in this game, which I adore. I feel like all of the concessions in movement have been made to the player to make it fun. So you can get high quickly, you can float down, you can fall down, you can use stairways, you can use your grappling, you can mantle, and you really do feel like a parkour ninja in this game. It's fantastic. And so what you're doing really is traveling between story points where you'll have spooky story encounters that tend to take the form of a small linear section of game, where you'll find boss battles, where you'll find story moments, where you'll find cutscenes and so forth. But there is also a big open world aspect to this game, where you can run around the map finding power-ups, finding lost spirits, helping out sad ghosts in side quests, and helping them to put their worries to rest and move on. And all of these stories have really nice, insightful offers to do with Japanese life and to do with Japanese culture, whether it's something spiritual like a haunting, or whether it's just someone that has an unresolved personal life matter that they need to get to the bottom of. The side quests are very short and not demanding at all and not in-depth at all, but they are insightful and interesting enough for you to want to do them when you see one of these ghosts. Another big aspect of the gameplay is the combat. It's been described as a first-person shooter, but I don't really like to say that, because although you're using projectiles, there are no guns in this game. What you're using is hand signs. And so when you're in combat, you will use the R1 button to open a weapon wheel, and you will have some elemental attacks that you can use. You have air, which is a vertical chop. So the hand will chop into the screen and shoot a blast of air that visualizes like a green ray very quickly into enemies. And that's a very light, ranged attack. It's the one that you have the most power to use. There is water, which is an emphatic horizontal chop across the screen that sends out a short-range wave with some width to it, so you can hit several enemies at once if you're being mobbed. And then there is the fire attack, where you use both hands to send a jet of flame. It's more powerful, it's piercing. And each of these attacks has charged effects as well. So if you can manage to hold out and charge it, then you can do a more powerful variant of each attack. And I really like the way that this looks on the screen. The hands will come into the screen, they will sometimes arch the fingers, the palms will go together, there will be chops, there will be very precise movements. And it's really nice to look at, and it feels very satisfying somehow. It's just a really nice change from seeing a gun pointing into the screen or a sword. Instead, you see your character doing these elegant mudras and hand signs that are just very beautiful in their own way, and there's some resonance to them. They just feel really good. So whilst the gameplay might resemble FPS gameplay, it just feels very different. It's more like using magic in Skyrim or something like that. There are a few different enemy types. There's not an awful lot. The main one is a rainwalker, and these are businessmen with blank white faces, and they are hairless, and they're like aliens in black suits with umbrellas. They are kind of sad. They walk around dragging their feet. Sometimes when you find them, they are looking into a car window or examining something on the ground, like they're melancholic and confused. And there is a stealth element to the combat, so if you can stealth up to them, then you can exorcise them from behind using the L2 button. And each enemy has a core in it, and you can either quick exorcise it by stealthing up to them, surprising them, and pulling that core out with your hands, for which you get a really cool animation where their head kind of bends over backwards, and it's kind of scary and cool. Or you can just get into ranged combat with them, and if you alert them to your presence, then all the nearby enemies will mob towards you. There is often 3 or 5 or more. And if you get into ranged combat, you have to blast them until their core is revealed, at which point you can hold down R2 to use your Ghostwire, and that means that the wire will shoot out, attach itself to the core of the enemy, and your hands will do this cool kind of cat's cradle animation, and then will pull out the core, and the enemy is gone. But if you're hit whilst you're doing this maneuver, it will reset, and the enemy will regenerate. So there's a kind of a risk-reward thing going on, where you're trying to decide, can I pull the core from this enemy before another enemy hits me? If you manage to take down 3 or 4 different enemies to having their core revealed all at once, then you can pull the cores from several enemies at once, and that's really satisfying to do. So you can kind of spread your fire across the different enemies, and then they become paralyzed when their core is revealed. They pause for a couple of seconds, and if you can get several at once, that's a really nice feeling to just harvest all these enemy cores at once. The combat is quite simple. It doesn't develop greatly throughout the game. The bouts are usually over quite quickly. And as you're running around the map, your controller will make a noise from the controller speaker, like a little grating noise when enemies are nearby. You have a sort of a spirit ping that you can do that will show their outlines through buildings or round corners. And you can extend the range of that spirit ping in the skill tree. So there's elements of stealth, there are elements of running around carefree in the open world. You will come to clumps of enemies, usually guarding something of interest, and then you can take them out. You can run away at any time. It's very low commitment, it's very low difficulty. I think I could count the amount of times that I died in my 22-hour playthrough, probably on both hands. It's probably around the 10 mark. I didn't die very much. You can heal in combat as well, but that does take up your hands, so you can't... It's another risk-reward thing. Like, it takes a few seconds for you to gulp down food from your backpack or whatever, and you can't attack in that time. But for the most part, you can stealth the first enemy, and then they will see you and start coming for you, and then you can walk backwards and just kite them so they all come towards you, and then you can take them out before they get to you. Pretty simple combat, but enjoyable, fast, arcadey, short bouts. There are a couple of other enemy types. There is a paper-faced older lady. There are headless school children who are quite rapid, but don't take many hits, and they come and try and melee attack you. There are cops that will come at you with batons, and as you move through the game, more enemy types appear. There are more powerful and slightly more scary enemies that will come at you really rapidly and have really scary attacks. Like the first one of the latter phase of enemies is a woman with a hat. She's very tall. She's a little bit like the Resident Evil 5 Lady Dimitrescu, and she has a pair of scissors, and she comes at you with the scissors. She's a little bit unnerving the first few times that you find her, but once you've gotten to grips with how to handle her, you can take care of them. So, and there are a few more enemies as the game progresses. You'll see enemies with different coloured clothing that shows that they have different abilities. But there isn't really any elemental interaction. So if you see someone that's wearing red clothing, they might come at you with a fire attack, but using your water attack won't necessarily affect them more, at least not as far as I could see. So the elemental system isn't really about balance and choosing what to use in that way. There are also some collectibles that you can get. You can recharge your ether, and that means that, for example, wind, you might have 21 shots, water, you might have 12, fire, you might have 5, and each time you use a shot, your ammo ticks down, and you have to find floating objects in the environment which you strike with the palm of your hand in this karate-style gesture that recharges your ammunition. There are blue floating people all around the environment. These are disembodied spirits, and when you find them, you absorb them into a little Katashiro paper doll. If you've seen Spirited Away, these are the little paper dolls that hound Chihiro sometimes. So you hold up a little paper doll and you can absorb these spirits. You then take them to a phone box when all of your Katashiro are full, and this is another really interesting way that this game makes the world seem magical, because it does take a familiar environment, or Shibuya or Tokyo, and it makes it magical. And so if you come up to a phone box in this game, you come up to the phone box, you use the phone by pressing L2, but rather than picking up the receiver, the whole phone opens up, and it turns out that under the keypad of the phone and under the receiver, there is a mechanism that is a spirit scanner. You hold your paper Katashiro to the scanner, those souls are then transmitted to safety, the visitors, the bad guys, can no longer get them, and you get experience points and money as a reward. And so the idea of every single payphone in Tokyo actually hiding a secret spirit scanner is really cool, and it's a way that it makes the landscape feel secretive and mysterious, like there is something else going on in Tokyo than what you might think. You can also find food. You can find more of the Katashiro paper talismans. You can find relics, which go into your documents. You can find things like Japanese masks or red shoes or musical instruments. And each one comes with a text entry that will explain something about Japanese culture to you, the significance of that object. You can also find money. You can find cats and dogs that you can talk to and get rewards from. And you can dispel yokai. And all of this adds up to a really interesting, rich, fun and playful game experience where you're running between different combat encounters, you're talking to ghosts, you're dispelling different yokai, you're talking to Shiba dogs that will then dig up coins for you, you're going up to the roofs and down to the ground level, and it's just a really fun, fluid, fast-moving, arcadey experience between those interesting story points. It's really well done. It's a good gameplay loop. So there is a lot to like about Ghostwire Tokyo. The moment-to-moment gameplay is very satisfying. You get as you cleanse these torii gates to lift the fog and open up different areas of the map. You'll get lots of map markers on the map in the area that you've cleared, and there you'll find different things that you can do in each neighborhood between story missions. And one of the most interesting things that I wanted to spotlight that you can do in this game is to do with the different mythical creatures that you can encounter. These are called yokai, and yokai are like Japanese mythical beings. They are strange mythical creatures that do exist in Japanese culture. They are superstitious. They're quite odd and interesting. I guess every culture has its own superstitions, but the Japanese version is just quite rich. And I would say that they have been paraphrased into the game. For example, I was just Googling some of them to do my research, and one of the most common ones that you will encounter is called a tengu. And this is a winged creature. In the game, it hangs high above tower blocks and high above buildings in hard-to-reach places, and you can grapple to them. They're basically grapple points. If you can look at one from ground level, hit X, and you'll use your Ghostwire to grapple straight up to them, and suddenly you're on a rooftop. But in actual Japanese mythology, these are winged warriors, and they can be a curse or they can be noble. They've kind of had a real journey in Japanese culture, from being troublesome spirits that will have wings and swords and can be a curse on a family. And they've had rehabilitation at some points, but in this game it's basically a squawking grapple point, and that's it. There is also the kappa. This is a shelled creature that lives in the water, and you have to tempt them out with a cucumber before you can exorcise them. There is one called a nurikabi. These are blocking spirits, so they can make invisible walls, or they can block people in or impede their path. In this game, you use the spirit ping when you see a burned wall or a marked wall, and they are like a fake doorway with a big eye that is revealed when you ping it and can then be dispelled with a hand gesture to let you into a secret area. And there is the kodama, which is maybe the best known of all of these. It's a little tree spirit, immortalized in lots of Miyazaki's work, like the forest spirits in Princess Mononoke, those little clicking guys that you see. But in this game, they are little leaf bundles on legs. They're pretty silly. So I guess the game paraphrases a lot of Japanese mythological creatures in quite an interesting way, and you do get little diary entries about them, so you can look at your codex and learn more about them if you want to. But safe to say that between these talking Shiba and these cats, Kodama and Tengu and Kappa, it's paraphrasing Japanese mythology in an entertaining way. So whilst it does have an element of authenticity that comes from having a Japanese development team, it is also paraphrasing these creatures So if you are interested in Japanese culture, you might find it amusing to see how they've been used to slot into the gameplay of this game. So there is a lot of Japanese culture in this game, and that's one of its real strengths, I think, is that the environment that you're looking at is one-for-one Shibuya to some degree. Like you'll recognize it if you've been there. You'll recognize buildings. You'll see the drinks machines that are everywhere, and the overpasses, the neon billboards that you'll see everywhere. That it has that texture of really being closely based on the place. That is really enjoyable and adds a nice feeling of realism to the environment that you're in. It was also surprisingly deep in story. I think there is also always a little bit of a disconnect between the way that Japanese games tell stories and the way that we are used to having stories told to us in the West. It feels like you have to get in tune with the Japanese style of storytelling, and it can feel a little stiff and a little odd, but it does a good job here. And I think that as the game progresses, the relationship between Akito and KK is really pleasant. It does move on from being confrontational and confusing, as of course it would be in this scenario, to KK revealing more about his personal life and to becoming more of the veteran father figure for Akito, who is the young protagonist who has his own personal life stuff, who's more of an optimist, and KK is more of the grizzled old paranormal investigator. And their relationship is really nice. It does take on the qualities of being like a buddy movie as the game progresses. And it is quite a goofy modern horror story in a way. I'm not going to tell you what's happening. I guess what is going down in Tokyo is one of the central mysteries of the game, so I won't spoil it here. But it is goofy, it's light, it's Netflixy, so the main plot is a little familiar. Like, we've seen this a lot. It could be just it could be a Netflix series. It's not particularly momentous what is going on. There is a villain, the masked villain, and you'll find out more about them. You'll find out more about what the paranormal event was. It feels like it could have gone in some really far out and cool directions, and it stuck quite close to the beaten path in terms of what the story actually is. That said, even if the main plot is a little predictable and familiar, the emotional content of it is quite interesting. There is quite a heartfelt story here, and even if it is contained in quite a predictable vessel of this plot, the personal content and the human content of the story, what's going on with the different characters, is quite heartfelt. And by the end, I felt like I'd been through a story that was worth going through, even if at times it was a little silly and predictable. But there is more interesting stuff in the story too. For example, the side quests, when you talk to ghosts, you'll often find that they have commentary to make on the work-life balance of Japan, for example, on how they feel unfulfilled by their life. It's a bit of a critique on late capitalism through the Japanese lens in a way that I found quite surprising. For example, KK will at some point say to Akito, "All property is theft, kid," which is obviously like an anarcho-socialist idea, and quite interesting to find in a game like this. Many of the ghosts that you talk to will complain about the work conditions. They'll complain about feeling hollow. They'll complain about having to be too much at work, too much at the grindstone, and not feeling fulfilled. And so there is a critique that runs through the game of Japanese society and of late capitalism. It was actually quite surprising, and I was quite pleased to see that in this game. In a big mainstream game like this, it's nice that it even has a stance on these issues. And then, of course, there is the Japanese mythology, and when you start tying all of this together, like a heartfelt story, good moment-to-moment gameplay, some social critique, some texture of Japanese mythology, this cool-looking Tokyo rendition, there's quite a lot here to get your teeth into. It's pretty good, you know. It's greater than the sum of its parts in some way. So now to run through some of the downsides to the gameplay and to the game. I'm going to start by saying that the visuals, whilst impressive and arresting, feel a little bit last gen in some way. And that might sound like a bit of a nothing complaint to make. But when I first saw this as a PS5 exclusive, and having played things recently like Horizon, and to see what AAA games are capable of being on this new generation of console hardware, I have to say that Ghostwire, it has a quality that reminds me of older games, like Valve games, like Portal, Half-Life 2 kind of thing. There are times when you walk up to things and you can see pixels on the texture, and you really do feel like you are playing a video game. The realism isn't quite there. It's quite angular and blocky sometimes. And whilst the attention to detail is there in the drinks machines, the types of buildings, the lampposts and the malls, the architecture, things like the detail on the enemies, the textures on the road, things like that, the rain. The rain is pretty cool actually, but even so, like everything about it feels like a step back in time visually. And that was a little bit surprising to me for a Bethesda game. Whether or not you consider them to be AAA, they pretty much are, right? Xbox owns them now. I would also say that the moment-to-moment gameplay can be a little slow when you first begin. There are a lot of long animations in this game. For example, using your Ghostwire to pull the core from an enemy can take 4 or 5 seconds, and you can speed that up by unlocking your skill tree. There are lots of things like that, like the amount of time it takes to charge. The dogs that you find, you can hand feed them. That's a 5-second animation every time. So there are lots and lots of long animations where you're going to feel like you don't have control over what's happening on the screen. And they are fun at first because it's nice to see those hand animations that are very elegant and fast and fun. And it's nice to see hand feeding a Shiba, which will then talk to you, at least at first. But then by the 10th time, the 20th time, and ultimately by the 50th time, you're hand feeding a dog in a 5-second animation, you're going to wish you could skip it. Even if it is an adorable Shiba, you've just seen it too much at that point. So, and absorbing spirits is the same as well. When you absorb those floating blue spirits, it's going to take you 4 or 5 seconds. So there are lots of things that slow you down. And I wish that wasn't quite that way, or at least because by the end of the game, these things are happening pretty rapidly, like pulling cores from enemies, that kind of thing. You've sped them up by unlocking your skill tree, but it does make the gameplay feel a little clunky at first in a way that perhaps it didn't need to be. This one isn't really a critique, but I found this game easy. And I'm not that good at games, so if you are someone, I played it on normal difficulty, if you are someone that likes a challenge in your games, I would say that you should play this one on difficult or more. It's pretty easy to breeze through it, but there are a couple of tripping blocks, like there was one boss where I died a couple of times, which is you have to creep up behind it and pull its tail feathers out or something like that. And I found moments like that the stealth system didn't feel very robust. It's basic, and whilst there is a lightness to many of the mechanics, such as the traversal, such as the mantling and climbing, the gliding, the stealth, they're all perfectly functional and they are very natural feeling. They're also very basic. There isn't much to it. And so when you actually have to use the climbing or the stealth for something specific, like a boss or a puzzle, it can start to feel a little frustrating. It didn't happen a lot, so it's not a big critique, but I will say that the various systems in this game all feel very light, and that goes for the descriptions. They are a little bit like first drafts, sometimes just a few lines. It feels like they could have been worked up a little bit, which makes the codex feel a little lighter than you might have liked, or a little less authoritative. The skill tree is very light. There are lots of incremental upgrades that feel like a bit of a waste of your time. I like a substantial upgrade, not a percentage upgrade, you know what I mean? Something that unlocks gameplay in a new way, rather than making gameplay better in some way. I would rather that the gameplay had been better from the beginning and that spending my skill points opened up something new rather than making something less annoying. The mantling and gliding can feel a little light. Sometimes it can feel... I don't know, it's kind of a hard thing to explain, but the systems in this game don't feel incredibly developed. They feel like they do what they need to and nothing more. There isn't much nuance to anything in this game. And so there is like a lightness to the gameplay that makes it speedy and satisfying, but it also makes the game feel lightweight in some way. But that's pretty much it for my critiques. There are a couple of things that I wasn't a big fan of, but I would construe as being spoilery. So I'm just going to skip over those. Let's just say there are some gameplay developments that are unexpected, that are peppered throughout the game that I didn't fully appreciate. I'm not going to talk about them here. If you're interested, I will talk about them on the Discord and I will black them out. So you can come and ask me there or ask me on Twitter if you would like to know more about that. Overall, I think this was a very good game. It was better than I expected. I was hot and cold on it throughout my playthrough in a way that I find a little unusual. At first, I was a little put off by the basicness and the last-gen feeling of the visuals because I was expecting something next-gen and shiny and new. And this game isn't that, despite the nicely detailed rendition of Tokyo. And I found the gameplay very light. I felt like I was running around between map markers like a headless chicken rather than developing my gameplay experience. But I got into that as well. There were times at which I thought this is a perfect comfort food game. You can just clear the map at your own pace. You can do the story if you want to do that. You can go and get into combat. You can clear off these corrupted trees. You can do side missions. You can cleanse gates and open up the whole map. Or you can run around talking to dogs. The decision is yours. It's very, very light. It's a little bit Ubisofty in that way. Lots of map markers for you to clear, and very modular in that way. Like you'll find the same thing in every area of Shibuya. If you like that kind of gameplay, this is a really good example of it. And by the end, I did think that this game had an emotional payoff that I wasn't quite expecting. And I was quite moved by the end of it. I thought the way that the story resolves with Akito and KK and both of their respective backstories was quite touching by the end. So all in all, I think this is a really solid game. I think it's a little overpriced. I would maybe wait for it on sale or see if in 6 months' time it's on a PS Plus or the new PS Plus, whatever that might be. Unless you really like the sound of it, in which case it's a really fun time. It's a nice open world game with a unique setting, more than the sum of its parts in some way, and that really cool comfort food gameplay. Enjoyable game. That's Ghostwire Tokyo. So that was Ghostwire Tokyo. I hope you enjoyed that review. I enjoyed that game and I enjoyed talking about it, so thank you very much for listening. If you would like to hear more from me or to get in touch, you can do so on social media. I'm at Gaming in the Wild on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, everywhere really, but Twitter is the main place. I'm also daily on the show's Discord. If you would like to join that Discord and to show your support for this podcast, I really appreciate that. You can do so at patreon.com/gaminginthewild, and I will put a link in the show notes if you're interested in that. I'll be back next week with a new episode. It might be about Kirby and the Forgotten Land. It might be about Weird West. It might be about Dorfromantik, a new game that I've gotten a code for that is about to come out on Steam after a period of open beta. That's a really interesting one. It's a peaceful building strategy and puzzle game where you create a beautiful and ever-growing village landscape. That sounds absolutely gorgeous. So it might be one of those games that I talk about, or something else completely, but I'll be back next week with a new episode. So take care of yourselves and each other, and bye-bye for now.